Good morning and welcome. I'm Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I'm so glad that you are here with us this morning. The beginning of this morning's prayer is by Laura Wallace. As frozen earth holds the determined seed, this sacred space holds our weariness, our worry, our laughter, and our celebration. Let us bring seed and soul into the light of thought, the warmth of community, and the hope of love. And I add a few lines more of prayer. We lift up in our hearts and prayers all those who are in need, all those who fear, who suffer, who hunger. We lift up in our hearts and prayers those who are prisoner to their extremist beliefs, who see no other ways of being, even those desperate enough to leave their child and take the lives of innocent bystanders. How desperate they must be, those who commit such acts of violence. And we lift up in our hearts and prayers those who suffer at the hands of extremists, those who live in fear, who are not free. We lift up all of the peaceful Muslim faithful who are not represented by those who take lives in the name of their God, who fear now for their own safety and acceptance, who fear retribution. We lift up our own broken hearts for a world being turned upside down by senseless violence, for political rhetoric that feels so blunt and small-minded, for the distance we feel from peace going into this season which is supposed to be joyous and peaceful. May our longing for dialogue, peace, and understanding be made manifest in our actions and in the actions of our representatives in the world. May our prayers for greater understanding outweigh the call for closed ports and closed hearts. May there be space this season for our grieving as well as our joy. May that determined seed make its way out of the frozen earth, and may our hearts, grown cold and hard, be thawed by all that is beautiful and good. Amen. Our reading this morning is by Siri Liv Myram, called The Shoulder Season of Advent. My father is a Lutheran pastor, she writes, and to me, Christmas is chaos. The few days leading up to Christmas Eve were full of stress-packed activity. Rehearsals, performances, multiple services, late nights. The list was long and time felt thin and brittle. We ran headlong into Christmas, like kids who get going downhill and don't know how to control their speed. On Christmas Eve, between the 7 and 11 p.m. services, long after dark, we'd gather around our tree to open presents, yawning and trying not to fall asleep before driving back to the church for the midnight mass. Christmas had its own adrenaline-fueled excitement for sure, and I honestly don't remember resenting it at the time, and I don't now. It was just what we did, but it rarely felt reverent and never felt restful. Christmas is the extrovert of the church calendar. It's social and busy. It's loud and flashy and well-fed and adorned. It's beautiful and charismatic and has the most wonderful story to tell. People often talk about wanting a more peaceful Christmas, but in the end, its call to come and join the party is a tough one to turn down. Christmas is the guest everyone is eagerly watching for. We're looking out the window, checking our watches, squealing with glee, and clamoring to the door as it finally pulls into the driveway. It's here! It's here! Maybe this is why I have always loved the shoulder seasons of the church, and Advent in particular. It's an introvert's season. Advent is expectant and full of hope. There's also a solemn quality to the waiting, not dour or dreary, something grounded and okay with a close stillness, a quality that honors the waiting itself as sacred. It is a patient season. It asks us to be patient too. Advent asks us to make peace with the lingering and reminds us that we can. It gently shows us again that there can be deep joy in that in-between place, that one foot in front of the other pace. Certainly there is room for both the celebratory and the subdued. I just find that when Advent rolls around, my heart is so hungry for that deliberate quieting in the midst of the noise. The church in 21st century America does a lot of talking. Advent resets the church as a space for holy listening, something that it desperately needs more of. The church does a lot of deciding and declaring. Advent calls us to reflect on the profound power of being, even, perhaps especially, when we don't have all the answers. How can I be a space, simple, open, warm, stilled, that is prepared to receive the smallest, humblest, most vulnerable version of divinity when it comes quietly knocking at my door? Can I welcome a God I don't recognize at first? A God who shows up in rags, comes from another country, and is dependent on my meager shelter? Am I brave enough for that? With 2 young girls, we're starting to forge our own Advent traditions. We light candles in the early dark, sing songs, talk about the never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love of God. We ask for new eyes to see the miracle that intentionally makes its home in the midst of our daily mess. Last night, Stella, the youngest, loudest, and most kinetic person in our family, sat mesmerized by the candle flame. It lit a soft, warm circle around her face and hands, slowly bowing back and forth. She stared in a rare moment of silence, then smiled. "Look," she said, wonder-drenched and wise. "It's reaching for me. The light is trying to reach me." In the beginning of his prayer for the holiday season, my colleague Aaron Payson writes, "Oh, beloved, can it be that another year has passed? Wasn't it just yesterday when we heard such familiar music, when these well-worn stories awakened us from our post-harvest slumber? Wasn't it only weeks ago when we last reminisced about seasons past, when life seemed easier, when this season was so full of snowy wonder and glorious wants? Didn't we converse then about how much there was still to do and how short the daylight hours had become? Wasn't it we who sat together then and sipped warm cider, Or was it hot chocolate? And laughed as we shared again the memories of youth that gleam once again from our eyes? Or was it coffee and ruminations about a world gone mad? And hadn't we just made the promise that a year hence we'd be farther along than we were, and far more accomplished in the doing, those perpetually elusive resolutions that prove us kin in effort and siblings in spirit? Yes, Aaron, it seems just yesterday that we were here in this holiday season, but a year has passed. And yet, taking stock of the world around us, we do not see the progress of a year. We see instead a world gone even more mad, and that peace seems even more elusive than it did last year. And we haven't all accomplished those things we set out to do either. And there are more faces missing at the table when we gather now. Although the holidays are meant to be a joyful time, it seems right to set aside this one Sunday when we can admit that we are not feeling joyful a lot of the time, that we are feeling sad and desperate and anxious, that we are feeling mournful and missing those we love who used to be a part of this season of happiness, that we are feeling fearful because the world does not seem like a safe place, that we do not seem to have the time to process one atrocity before the next occurs, and that social media and technology bring us news so immediately that it is too fast and too much for our hearts to process. And so we are left feeling unsettled, uncentered, going into the holidays. It helps only a little to remember that the stories of hope that we tell at this time of year are also set in unsettled times. That the Hanukkah lights were lit amidst the rubble of war, that Jesus was born in an uncertain and violent time of oppression, that solstice was celebrated out of a real fear that the return of the sun was not assured, and that some action needed to take place to bring it back. What is that action that needs to take place in us to welcome light? What is that one foot in front of the other movement that will move us forward through this season? I think that one thing we can do is to make space in this holiday season for our grief as well as our joy, to acknowledge our heartbreak so that we do not feel false when taking part in the more joyful rituals, so that the hopeful moments do not feel so dissonant. Often we harden our hearts to all the joys of the season in order to protect that fragile grief we are carrying inside. But this needn't be a hidden part of what we are feeling this Christmas. Mary Caroline Richards wrote, "But how are we to love when we are stiff and numb and disinterested? How are we to transform ourselves into limber and soft organisms lying open to the world at the quick? By what process and what agency do we perform the great work transforming lowly materials into gold? Love, like its counterpart death, is a yielding at the center. Look deep into my eyes and see the love light, figured forth in intelligent cooperation, sensitive congeniality, physical warmth. At the center, the love must live. Love is not a doctrine. Peace is not an international agreement. Love and peace are beings who live as possibilities in us. But to acknowledge the love and peace who live as possibilities in us, we must also acknowledge the grief that is so alive in there too. This morning we offer you not the merry carols that we will sing on Christmas Eve, but the more somber ones. The ones that acknowledge with us that although Christmas is a time for peace, peace is not yet present, that it is an aspiration. The choir offered you Christina Rossetti's beautiful words about the bleak midwinter, a somber setting for a miracle. And we offer you a ritual for acknowledging the grief that you carry. On our altar this morning, we have a grieving tree. And in a moment, I'll invite those of you who have lost loved ones this year, or who are missing loved ones at this time of year who have died in years past, to come forward and tie a black ribbon onto the grieving tree. In this way, we make space in our holiday rituals for our grief, so that we may strive to keep our hearts limber and soft, to keep the possibility of love and peace alive in us. How are we to love when we are stiff and numb and disinterested? By remembering those we are missing so keenly at this time of year, and by making them a part of this season. Those who are moved to come forward to tie a ribbon of remembrance, please come up this side aisle, which you can reach from the back of the sanctuary, and return to your seats up the center and far aisles. And those of you remaining in your seats, I invite you to spend this time in prayerful attention, sending love and comfort to those who mourn. Let us begin. I cannot tell you how the light comes. What I know is that it is more ancient than imagining, that it travels across an astounding expanse to reach us, that it loves searching out what is hidden, what is lost, what is forgotten or in peril or in pain, that it has a fondness for the body, for finding its way toward flesh, for tracing the edges of form, for shining forth through the eye, the hand, the heart. I cannot tell you how the light comes, but that it does, that it will, that it works its way into the deepest dark that enfolds you, though it may seem long ages in coming, or arrive in a shape that you did not foresee. And so may we this day turn ourselves toward it. May we lift our faces to let it find us. May we bend our bodies to follow the arc it makes. May we open and open more and open still to the blessed light that comes. I know that for many of us, having a Merry Christmas is not a realistic goal for this year. Some of us lost a parent this year, a cousin, a brother. Some of us are caring for ill family members this year and friends and are afraid of death. Some of us lost beloved spouses and partners this year, or at this time of year long ago. Some of us broke up with the love of our lives. Some of us are depressed. Some of us are lonely. Some of us despair at the world. Some of us are fighting addictions. Some of us are consumed by financial worry. Some of us made a big mistake this year that we can't seem to set right. Some of us have been crippled by injury. Some of us are wrestling with old wounds of the body and soul. Some of us are worried that we won't have a place to live in the new year. Some of us are contemplating suicide. Some of us are afraid of not being able to make it through another winter. Some of us are not welcomed by our families for the holidays. Some of us are leaving behind everything we know. Holding these heavy burdens during a season set aside for joy can make this month especially challenging. There's not a place set at the holiday table for our despair. So for those of us who are struggling, asking how we can possibly have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year might just be the wrong question. Those things just might be beyond us this year. So instead, let us ask ourselves this question: how can I be a space, simple, open, warm, stilled, that is prepared to receive the smallest, humblest, most vulnerable version of divinity, of happiness, of love, of hope, when it comes quietly knocking at my door? I can't promise you a Merry Christmas. I can't promise you that your family will get along, that you won't feel lonely, that your grief will give you any reprieve. I can't promise you that the darkness of this season won't be black and deep and long. I can make you a small promise about the light. It's reaching for you. The light is trying to reach you. I promise. Amen. And blessed be.